going to show it at the red thing at an hour and 15 minutes. Well, 15 minutes. When you see that red, you have 15 minutes left of that hour.
And gentlemen, hey, there we go. Welcome back. All right, here is the book, Raechel's Eyes. Man, guys, this is really an incredibly fascinating account of alien presence. And we have the authors of this book here to relate this story to you firsthand. Helen Luttrell lived this story. Jean Bilodeau investigated it. Together, they wrote the book. And here, together, they present Raechel's Eyes. Welcome now, Helen Luttrell and Jean Bilodeau.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
Welcome.
First of all, I would like to thank Bob and Terry for inviting us. I would also like to thank the founders and board members of this Congress for providing a place for us to share our insights and experiences with each other. And to you, the audience, for coming to hear a story that perhaps will help you or help someone you know, someone that may have felt alone at some time in their life. I live in a very remote area. It was at one time, and probably still is, considered one of the 7 most remote areas in the United States. To get to the town east of where I live, the next town, you have to travel over 70 miles on a dirt road. Then you have to go another 30 miles on pavement to get to this town. This town has 40 people. To some, it's heaven. And to those, you couldn't find a more beautiful place on the face of this earth. But we humans are not the only ones that think this place is a wonderful place. Soon after I moved there, I realized that UFOs and their pilots also considered this a wonderful place to visit. In fact, we even laughed about it that we were on the tour maps for the galaxy. After a time, I started collecting stories and writing them, and wrote a series of articles on UFO sightings for the local newspaper. The newspaper was gracious. They had to serialize the 200 and some accounts over a couple of issues. But it was through these articles that Helen, who lives in another state, contacted me. And let me introduce to you Helen Luttrell. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank Bob and Terry very much for inviting us here. I've never been to this meeting before, to this conference, and it's been a real thrill, and we're having a wonderful time. And I live in a small town in southern Oregon. And yes, I was kind of interested in Jean's articles. It seemed, though, that as I read them, a lot of strange things started happening in my house, and just outside of my house, too. I would hear strange noises in my stove, which was not on at that time of year. I'd hear screeches. It sounded like a bird had fallen down the chimney, but that was not possible because I had a screen over the top of the chimney, and so there wasn't a bird out in the back of the stove. And just strange noises and things moving around in the house unexplainedly. And then there was also the issue of strange-looking birds that didn't look quite real showing up outside of my window. And those things would all happen every time I sat down to read one of Jean's articles, or several of them. And the minute I would put the articles down and do something else, all this activity would stop. The minute I'd sit down and read again, and we had the problem. So anyway, this is how Jean and I sort of met in a strange way. And I did contact her about some of my experiences, and especially about the situation of my daughter living with an alien-human hybrid as a college roommate. And so that's how we really got started.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Now, I don't know what you would do if someone called you on the phone and told you that they had a daughter who had a human-alien hybrid as a roommate. Perhaps my first thought was to hang up, but Helen sounded so sincere. And then I began to think, wow, what if this is true? Maybe we should share this with everyone. Others need to know. The result of that thought is this book, Raechel's Eyes. Helen told me this story, and I'll give you a brief summary of the story for those who have not heard of this. Helen had a daughter named Marissa. She was a joyful, happy, normal child. She had brothers. She wanted a sister. She was somewhat of a peacemaker in the family, but there were plenty of squabbles. At about the age of 8, she developed diabetes, and shortly thereafter, she became blind. But she had a goal. She wanted to help others in their lives, other handicapped adults. She was going to go to college. She was going to get a degree and go on and help people. But she needed help. She had an apartment close to the college that she attended because she had to walk to classes. She needed a roommate to help with expenses. And that is when Raechel started into her life and became her roommate. Raechel's adopted father was a colonel in the Air Force, stationed nearby. At least that's what he said. It wasn't long, excuse me, before certain things began to happen. An accident happened with Helen, and it became apparent that Raechel was not a normal human being. And we'll go into that more lately. But as Helen told me this story, I could sense the relief in her voice, because this was a secret that she had kept for years and years, unable to share with anyone for fear of ridicule or just being thought crazy. It was a wonderful story, and as a newspaper correspondent, I thought, well, it's a great story, but how do you prove something like this? Now, we divided the book into 3 areas, and it essentially shows how we approached the case. We wrote down Marissa's story as Helen, her mother, remembered it. She remembered a great deal of this story. And then, because I had seen on television that regressions help people remember things that they have forgotten, we decided to do some regressions. That way, I had plenty of names to research, to find these people from 30 years in her past. And I went to work researching the project. Of course, I didn't just walk up to people and say, "Hi, I'm Jean Bilodeau, and I am doing research on a human-alien hybrid. This is what you might call a conversation stopper." So I developed some politically correct techniques and got people to talking. This is a photograph of Marissa. Marissa was quite a gal. And Helen, could you please describe a little bit about her physically, personality, why she just had to go to college, her goals?
Well, this picture, first off, is a later picture. This was in later life. In fact, it was the last Christmas that we all had together, my boys and Marissa and her husband and myself. But let me tell you a little bit about her. She was always, as Jean said, the peacemaker. Or, well, she tried to be, but it's a little hard with two brothers because they're always saying, "She touched me, she's going to touch me," and it was, a lot of stuff like that went on in the family. But as the whole three of them got older, it seemed that they got along a lot better. And she was so motivated, even when she had first lost her eyesight. I don't remember, I think she was 15 at the time. And she lost it first in one eye. And she continued then to go to the local high school to finish up her education. But then shortly after that, a few months, maybe 6 or something, she lost the sight in her other eye, and then it was total blackness for her. So she then had to go by bus quite a ways, I think it was 25 or 30 miles almost, to a special school that was equipped with the teaching aids and the teachers too, to teach the handicapped students, handicapped in that respect. And it was really, really difficult for her. But she managed to graduate, and actually I should throw this in too. It was a challenge to read the books on tape because she had to listen to all of her lessons on recorded. And I just didn't have the time to do it, and her brothers didn't, and we finally found out about a project at the Vacaville prison where the prisoners, some of them, were in a project to read students' textbooks on tape, and they would stay up all night long or work 24/7, whatever it took, to get these textbooks on tape for the students. And so she managed to graduate from high school in that manner, and then she entered junior high school, and she was able to continue on with the prison project, reading all of her textbooks for her. And even as hard as it was for her to do her homework that way, no matter how long it took her, she managed to do it. And she had this goal of graduating from college and getting her bachelor's degree, and then she did go on to get her master's. And she wanted to be a counselor in rehabilitation, and that's what she became. She was able to accomplish that, and it was hard work. And I really admire anyone, not just my own daughter for doing that, but anyone who's got that much perseverance and just plain guts to do it.
We didn't know we were going to be doing PowerPoint presentations, and so we had to dig out some photographs to make this look a little more presentable. Helen is the one in the middle.
But that's Jean's Tiger Mustang Colt that she had.
Oh, not a Kiger, a Carter.
A Carter, okay. I thought it was a Kiger, but anyway, he's beautiful. He's just such a sweetie and so gentle. He licked my face that day, and I was sold then.
Well, after a few weeks, of having Raechel live with Marissa, Marissa became suspicious. She would ask Raechel, "What's your favorite song?" Now in the 70s, Simon and Garfunkel were big, and Marissa's favorite song was "Bridge Over Troubled Waters." Raechel had never heard of "Bridge Over Troubled Waters." She didn't know who Simon and Garfunkel were. And she didn't have a favorite song or a favorite singing group at all. She had no fund of basic social knowledge. She was good academically, but not socially. She had had no boyfriends. Marissa, being a very gracious young woman, thought that perhaps Raechel had been a victim of amnesia. After sometimes, she began to suspect that perhaps Raechel and her adopted father were something very different. She knew that Raechel and her father were hiding from the mafia. They were hiding out because the mafia was looking for them. Marissa was wrong. She was very, very wrong. But she conveyed these feelings to her mother and her friends and her husband-to-be. One day, Helen was visiting her daughter at the apartment, and she met Raechel. And through a very astounding, startling, and somewhat frightening experience, Helen realized that there was something very different about Raechel.
Yes, there certainly was, and you'd heard the expression up close and personal. Well, that was exactly how I met Raechel. What had happened was that I had gone to the apartment to spend a few minutes with my daughter, and so we did. We visited and had a pizza that I had brought along, and I was getting ready to leave, and I said, "Gosh, I wish I had a chance to meet Raechel." And my daughter said, "Well, she's just not here. I don't know when she'll be back." So we stood in the doorway saying goodbye, my daughter on one side and me on the other. And just then, my daughter said, "Well, I think I hear her coming up the steps." So she said, "Wait a minute." So I did, and sure enough, it was Raechel. And she hurried through and between us, and she said something about, in her mechanical voice, she said, "I have to get something." This was the way she spoke. She was very mechanical and no emotion in her voice. So anyway, I didn't think much about it at the time, but I stood there and waited for her to come back. And as she returned, I guess she tripped on a wrinkle in the rug or her own feet or something. Anyway, I could see she was going to go right over straight. She didn't bend at the waist or anything. She didn't try to catch herself either. So I was standing close enough to reach out and grab her, and I did. I grabbed her left arm and kind of stood her back up again. And as I did, the sleeve of her jumpsuit slid up. And by the way, she always wore a long-sleeve jumpsuit, plus a bandana tied around her head. And in those days, they tied it under the chin. They didn't tie it back in the back like they do now, but she had it tied under her chin, and she had huge wraparound sunglasses on. And she wore this whole outfit indoors and out all the time. So anyway, I reached out and I grabbed her arm, and as I did, her sleeve slid up like this. And I found myself grabbing onto skin that didn't feel quite real. I don't know if any of you out there, yes, I do too. Some of you are old enough to remember those dolls that we used to have. The skin was guaranteed to feel real. Well, it sort of did, but not really. And I remember my doll Beverly, she had skin like that. And anyhow, as I grabbed onto Raechel's arm and stood her back up, then with both hands, the skin didn't feel real. Not like other people's anyway. To begin with, it felt really cool, and it was a hot evening. It should have felt hot because it was in that part of California at that time of year. It's pretty warm. So anyway, I stood there holding onto her for a minute, and then I realized the skin felt different yet. It was sort of spongy, like mushrooms. And you know, mushrooms have sort of a cool, they just have a spongy feel to them, and that was how the skin felt. Well, if that would have been the end of it, that would have been great. I wouldn't have thought much about it. But just then, as a result of the jerk to bring her back up to standing, her glasses slid down on her nose. And I found myself looking face to face, eyeball to eyeball almost, into her eyes. And I had never, ever seen eyes like that in my whole life. They were huge, kind of rounded in the middle, next to the nose, and they went clear around onto the outside of her temples, and about a third of the way, between a third and a half of the way out. And they were avocado green, the inside of an avocado. And they had vertical black slits. And for a few seconds, I was pretty frightened because I'd never seen anything like that. And I just stood there. I was just drawn into her eyes almost. I'd never felt like that before either. If it was bad enough not to see anything like it, I had never felt that way before. And as I kept looking into her eyes, I could see that she was much more frightened than I was. And at that moment, my emotions turned to more of compassion because of how frightened she was. And I don't know exactly what she was fearful of, except that she had been discovered, obviously, that I realized that she wasn't what she was supposed to be. And then I almost felt a sort of love for her. And the really weird thing was that as I stood there looking into her eyes, I felt that she was really beautiful. And yet I hadn't seen her hair yet, because she still had the kerchief tied around her head. But something in her eyes made me feel compassion for her.
Helen said something just now in relating that story. It was the same thing, and we did not rehearse this part.
No, we didn't.
She said something. She said she felt like she was drawn into Raechel's eyes. We'll come back to that later. This is Helen's drawing of Raechel. Now, Helen isn't really an artist,
Sorry about that.
but I think you can get the idea of she didn't look quite normal. Is there anything else you want to say about Raechel? I mean, you did eventually see her hair. It was...
Yes, I did. And it was a beautiful reddish blonde. It was kind of skimpy and wispy, and it sort of had a mind of its own, too. She tried to comb it and, have it look attractive, and she kept it short. And I think she must have cut it herself, because come to think of it, I don't believe she was going to any beauticians at that time. I didn't think of that till right now, but I don't believe she did. But her skin was sort of an orange, light orange, a little bit of a greenish tint to it. Not much. She didn't look like the little green men, not to that extreme. But it was really a beautifully clear complexion, and the avocado green eyes and the reddish hair. I know it sounds crazy to say that I thought she was beautiful, but I actually thought she was.
Well, college individuality aside, anyone that looks like that has got to have an interesting story behind her. And Helen, could you please, and we will explain to you later a little bit more in depth, but how Raechel came to be at the college and how you found out and why?
Okay. She was acquired, and I use that word acquired, by her adoptive father, who was a colonel in the Air Force. And he was stationed at a place called Four Corners, which technically didn't exist according to the military, and it wasn't on any maps that you could find. But it was all there underground. There were some old tumble-down buildings. But the function the assignment that the colonel had was to lead his group of men out to rescue crashed spacecraft, and rescue the crew if any had survived. And they didn't have very many crashes. It was actually a place where spacecraft came in to exchange scientists from that planet and the galaxy with our scientists. So usually everything went smoothly. They landed, exchanged, took off, and went back. But it didn't this time. It crashed on impact. And the other 2 crew members were killed. However, when the colonel went out to check the situation over, he thought he saw a little movement inside, and the craft was starting to burn, so he went inside to investigate this movement, and he found Raechel there. Pulled her out, took her back to the base, to the little dispensary they had, and he felt an instant bonding with her that he never could explain, and so he had to report to headquarters what had transpired, that he found a small, what he took to be a female. And so he wanted to keep her. The nurses there wanted to keep her. They said they would help take care of her. And so he reported this, and they said, well, he could keep her, but he had to agree to a legal adoption to raise her as his own daughter, or his own child at any rate, to integrate into society after a while. So that was how he happened to get her, and the time came when she was doing well there. They schooled her on the base, and then he was transferred to a base close to where I was working, and it was time then for her to enter college and integrate the best she could. That was the objective of the humanization project that had sponsored his adoption. So he signed her into a local college, and it just so happened that my daughter had just entered college also, and she needed a roommate to help her meet expenses and also to help her with activities of daily living. So it happened that the next day, I believe it was, the colonel and Raechel showed up in this counselor's office, and it turned out that Raechel was looking for a person who wouldn't be too particular about how she might look or act. And it was sort of not a marriage made in heaven, but a situation made in heaven. And the 2 girls moved in together and became roommates.
After this I would like to clarify that the 4 corners that Helen is referring to is not the 4 corners with the states. This is another area. It is in Nevada, though. After this confrontation, where this knowledge that Helen just shared with you was told to Marissa and to Helen, the girls became great friends. Marissa was handicapped. She had to eat a special diet because of her diabetes. Marissa had to eat a special diet also that was brought to their apartment. Raechel had to eat special foods. They had great fun. They accepted each other as they were. They went for walks together. They double dated. They came home from the double dates and giggled and laughed how they had put it over, fooled the guys that they went out with. They didn't know the truth. And believe me, I talked to someone who went out on a date with her, and he did not know. But they had great fun. Raechel became the sister that Marissa had always wanted. And Marissa became the sister and family that Raechel had always wanted also. One day, Marissa came home from classes, and she walked into her apartment, and she looked around, and there was nothing left of Raechel's in the apartment. She walked into Raechel's bedroom. Nothing. A bare mattress. A dresser. Nothing to prove that she had ever been there. And then Marissa looked across the room and saw a note taped to the mirror. She walked over, took the note off, went and sat on the mattress and read the note. And in essence it said, "Dear Marissa, you have been my first and only friend. I have loved my time together with you. I appreciate your friendship, and I have left you a gift." Marissa looks around. There's nothing in that apartment. It took Marissa about 10 minutes to realize what that gift had been. Now that is the end of the first part of the book. That was the easy part. Then we had to go on and do more research. How do you go about proving something that happened 30 or 35 years ago? I didn't know that Helen even had a daughter, let alone that she was blind, that she went to college, that she had a strange roommate. Helen didn't remember all the names of the people she had come in contact that long ago. But on the TV shows, regressions help, as I said, so we decided to try regressive hypnosis. And Helen agreed. She was a little dubious about it, but she was a good sport. And through the help of some San Francisco MUFON members, I was put in contact with Dr. June Steiner. And she agreed to come up to my area and do the sessions. Now, Dr. Steiner is extremely well qualified. She's a graduate of the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology and the American Institute of Hypnosis. She is the president of OPUS, the highly respected organization for paranormal understanding and support. And she was a peer of the late John Mack. I didn't know all this stuff at first, but I found out. Part 3 was the research, and I did most of that. My first instinct was just go to the college, ask for Raechel's transcripts, find out where she was living today, talk to her, write it up. Oh yeah, right. According to the college, Raechel never existed. She had never attended there. Yet I had talked to people who remembered Raechel. But at least I had names, places, people, state archives, college military bases, utility records, residences, and a zillion other things to research. I had plenty to do. We started with Dr. Steiner and Helen, and this is a photograph at the beginning of one of the sessions. I had heard that skeptics say that hypnotherapists ask leading questions. If the person being hypnotized says, "I saw lights in the sky," and then the hypnotherapist said, "What did the UFOs look like?" That is a leading question. Dr. Steiner and I spent 6 weeks looking up and working on questions in areas that we wanted to pursue with Helen. Helen was a bit nervous, but willing. Dr. Steiner was ready, and I thought I was ready. I'd watched the TV shows. I knew exactly how it was going to be, but boy, was I surprised. It was not like it was on TV.
None of us were ready for it.
No.
Prepared.
Even though Dr. Steiner was calm, caring, and cautious, the sessions became extremely emotional. Not only for Helen, but for June and myself, and the one or two people that June had brought with her from Stanford. Now, Helen and I will read a small portion of a transcript of one of these sessions, and I want you to pay particular attention to the types of questions asked and Helen's responses. This happened just after Helen had looked into Raechel's eyes. And remember, again, Helen's telling you about looking into Raechel's eyes. I will be the part of Dr. Steiner. I want you, 83, I want you to be there at that moment, Helen. You're reaching out. You're touching Raechel. I want you to feel it and see it.
I don't like to.
Why is that?
Oh, because she didn't feel real. Oh, oh.
Feel her arm and tell me.
Oh, it felt spongy, and it was cool, and it was a hot day. She shouldn't have felt cool, not that kind of cool. And it was spongy, and I couldn't let go, because if I did, then she'd fall. And Marissa couldn't see, she couldn't catch her, so I had to hang on. And she didn't go down, but her scarf slid, kind of back a little, and her glasses came forward.
And what did you see? Look at her face.
Oh,
What is the first thing you see?
the eyes, big, big eyes, black slits.
There were times when Helen would answer a question, but skip parts of the answer, or skip over an event, or say something that didn't make logical sense within the context of the question being asked. And when questioned about her leap in logic, she'd avoid the question or have an unusual emotional reaction. And when pressed for details, she'd say she didn't know, or she was afraid to say, or just plain, no, I'm not going to tell you. She's stubborn too. This type of response is sometimes referred to as a trigger event. The person under hypnosis doesn't want to deal with what is being discussed. And this can possibly be because of some trauma associated with what happened at that particular time. Helen refused to talk about the window room that she was taken to, that Raechel took her to when she looked into her eyes. And after several attempts, she did describe what was happening and volunteered that she had leaned over on a counter. And Dr. Steiner asked her, what happened? Well, I felt like I was a part of it, but I was separate. I raised my arm and it came off the counter. And then I kept my arms down at my side and I didn't touch anything. Now, Helen was very emotional about this. We don't think of anything. We put our hands on the table and counters, but something. She was very worried about the counter and touching this. That was probably a trigger event. And Dr. Steiner reviewed this until Helen was able to tell about her experience. Now, this is a drawing, as best I could do, of the counter room. I got very tired of, I couldn't do the little squares that are at the top of the oval. So you have to imagine that there are completely around every ring in that drawing. And could you tell us how you got to the counter room and what happened while you were first in the counter room?
Well, I found myself outside of this room of windows. It started, let me go back to how it started in the kitchen of the apartment. I had, again, stopped to see my daughter, and she wasn't there, but Raechel was. And I remember I leaned back, and I had one hand on the top of an old kitchen table. I don't know if you remember it, but they used to be kind of oblong kitchen tables, and they were an enamel top. It would be white. It was always cool, and I remember I stood there like this, and I had my hand on the top of the table, and Raechel and I had a short dialogue. She wanted to take me to see where she came from. And I didn't really want to do that, but it seemed that I didn't have a whole lot of choice. And I suddenly found myself outside of this room with all of the windows that Jean's talking about. And I'm on the outside, and I'm looking through, and here's Raechel on the inside, and she said, "Come on through." And I said, "Well, I can't. I don't see a door." And she said, "You don't need a door." She said, "I'll put my hand up on the inside, like that. I'll put my finger on the inside of the window, and you put yours on the outside, and you can come through." And this didn't make any sense to me, but I did it anyway, and I found myself going through the window and getting really long and wavy, like some of you might remember the feeling you got in what they used to call a fun house. You'd have all these funny mirrors, and some would make you look real wide and funny, and some would make you look real tall and wavy. Well, I was the tall and wavy going through the window, but then I was the ordinary size when I got on the other side. So that was when I went in that room and had the situation with my hand on the counter, and I felt as if the counter wanted to keep my hand, and I could get one finger loose. I had my hand on it, and I could get one finger loose, but then the rest of them stuck tighter, and I was getting in a panic about it. And as anyone would, if you're stuck to something and you can't get loose. And that was pretty much the way it was at this stage in this room.
All right. Clues sometimes come in very strange places. As I had told you, that Marissa had to have a special diet. Raechel also ate and drank specially prepared substances. While they're doing this, I'll tell a little bit about it. The food containers that were mysteriously delivered to the outside of the apartment door whenever they were needed were plain, white boxes, white drinking containers. But they all had this triangular symbol printed on them somewhere. Later on, you also found these. Tell them a little bit about the food that Raechel ate.
Yes, it was kind of unusual, and that was one of the first things that my daughter had noticed or discovered. She really couldn't see all that well, but as some of you may know, if you're diabetic or have one in the family, the eyesight fluctuates. Even though they may be legally blind, some days they can't see a thing, and then other days they see some stuff. And at any rate, the food that Raechel ate, she had told my daughter, don't ever touch it, because my daughter wanted to taste of it and see what it was like. And one of her good days, when she could get a glimpse of it, she noticed that it was kind of a mushy green substance, similar to warmed over spinach, warmed over 3 or 4 times. It's not very appetizing. And at any rate, Raechel told her, don't ever eat that. That's not, you can't have that. And there was also the drinking liquid, too, which showed up outside the door in big jugs, similar to the bottled water that we get nowadays, the size of the jugs at least. And Raechel also told her, don't ever drink that. You can't have that. And on the other hand, Raechel could not eat any of the food that my daughter had, or fast food. God forbid she should ever touch that. And in those days, kids, as they do now, they love fast food. But of course, my daughter couldn't have much of it. But Raechel was on a really, really restricted diet.
All right. Even an amateur sleuth can figure out this symbol means something, and something that we could follow up on. And I looked everywhere I could think of to find this symbol, this logo. Obviously, it was a logo of some kind of company, an organization. I checked the libraries, the internet, symbol and logo registries, dictionaries, hieroglyphs, astrology, mythology, and Chinese symbolism. Also, this symbol appeared on big black automobiles that occasionally carried men in black suits that visited Raechel.
I forgot to mention that this symbol was evident on every box of food that Raechel had, because it came in the little square boxes like frozen food used to 30 years ago. And it also appeared on each jug of her drinking water. Sorry, I forgot to say that before.
That's right. Finally, I was just frustrated, so I contacted the author of the Dictionary of Symbols, and he gave me some advice on how to proceed. He said to study the triangle and what it meant, the ideograms with the lines at their bases, and see what clues they gave me. I learned that a triangle can symbolize power, danger, God, the Holy Trinity, and fire. Symbols can also have opposite meanings. In this case, safety and success. A triangle with one line is the most common sign for the element of air and similarity in one dimension. A triangle with 2 lines is the alchemist sign for mixture with identity, with a similarity so strong that there is no difference. In meteorology, it means mist or an atmospheric condition where everything looks similar. The combination of these signs yields a symbol that could mean an organization filled with danger and having godlike powers. Genetic manipulation might be considered assuming godlike powers. Mixing 2 races, creating a new race where there are ultimately no visible differences. Now, earlier on, we left Helen in Raechel's room, so-called room, place where she was raised. And Helen was worried about the sticky counters, but that was nothing compared to what Raechel led her on to see.
I found myself inside, sort of in the center. Actually, it was in the center of these concentric rows of windows, and all around me, as I stood there in the middle, were these stacks or rows, one on top of another, of what looked like aquariums. this kind of a brackish, greenish looking water inside, or liquid inside. I don't know what it was actually. But that wasn't so bad as what was floating inside the aquariums and suspended in this liquid. It was, in each one, was a fetus, which looked like possibly in a different stage of development. They were not all the same size, and some were further along in development than others. And I felt really nauseated as I looked at them, because I'd never seen anything like this before either. And as Jean said, it was the hand on the counter thing was really nothing compared to this. And Raechel was inside this surrounding group of tanks. And she indicated to me that I was supposed to stay there and help take care of these things. And I called them things, and she was very irate, very, very upset. I was not to call them things, but that's what they were to me. And I told her that I was not going to stay there and take care of them. And then, as usual, I had to be a little flip about it. And I said, I already have a job. And she said she didn't care that they needed me to do that. And she said, well, if you don't want to do that, we could find something else for you to do. And I thought, I didn't come here looking for a job. I've got one, I have a family, I need to be going back home. But she still wasn't quite done with me. She said, well, you could be an educator. And I took that to mean teacher. And I said, I knew I had an out now, so I said, well, I have no credentials. I have nothing past high school education. She said, I think she was getting upset with me. And she said, you won't be, or you will not be a teacher. You will educate in another way. And we concluded our discussion by my agreeing to, yes, I would educate in a different way by this story of where she originated. And as we agreed on that, then she agreed to take me back home, or where we had started out from, in the girls' apartment. And I don't remember going back through the row of windows, getting long and wavy and reassembling on the other side or anything, but I do remember distinctly back in the kitchen with my hand still back in that same position on that porcelain topped or enamel topped table, still feeling the coolness of it, and still looking into her eyes as she stood across the room from me.
Great. Thank you, Helen, for sharing that somewhat emotional experience. Marissa graduated from college. She married. She had a child. And she realized her dream of helping other handicapped adults. She lived the American dream, as her husband told us. But when Marissa received her gift of sight from Raechel, she also received another sight that wasn't visual. She developed a second sight, precognition. It was upsetting to her at times. She saw a family of 5 murdered. She called her mother in tears. She had seen nothing in the paper. There was nothing on TV, nothing on the radio, nothing to say anything about that family. She wondered if she should call the police. There was nothing she could do. About 3 days later, it came out on the news that a family of 5 had been found murdered. She foresaw her own death. She discussed it with her husband and how he would raise their child. These are strange things. But these strange things did not stop happening after Marissa's death. Helen was visiting Eureka, California, where she met, and I call them the Eureka people. And could you tell us a little bit about why you were there and what they were?
And I want to explain, before people wonder why I'm sitting down and standing up, I pulled some muscles in my left leg, and it bothers me to stand in one place for very long, so that's why I'm up and down. So that out of the way, we'll go back to Eureka. And I had traveled there from where I was living in Southern Oregon for a wedding that was to be in the family. And it was kind of a stressful trip because I was supposed to get a hold of my boys who were getting together and coming up also separately. And I couldn't get a hold of either one, and they weren't getting a hold of each other. It was just a mess, and it was a long trip, too. So at any rate, I got to Eureka, and it was late, and I wanted to pay a short visit to the cemetery where my daughter was buried. And I couldn't remember how to get there. It had been several years, and it was kind of a windy route to get from the main highway to the cemetery. And I asked a couple of people, they didn't know, or they gave me wrong directions. And by the time I finally got there, the caretaker was about to close the gate, and I told him, well, I just need to go for a few minutes. And so he agreed to keep the gate open until I could go in and come back. So then the next step was, well, I hadn't eaten all day, and I was awfully hungry and just worn right out. So I went to a restaurant and sat down at a window booth, and I was just looking out, having ordered my meal, had a cold beer, and I looked out across, kind of kitty-cornered to another street that they came into a V there, and here were these two unusual-looking people. They were really tall and kind of unnaturally thin, and they had really long arms and legs when they walked sort of stiffly like that. And they were dressed in a light blue, I don't know what they call them. I call them racing suits that the bicycle riders wear, and the helmets. They looked like they were all dressed in one piece thing, but the helmet was separate. And they walked sort of just stiffly and artificially, and I thought, God, they look strange. And as they got closer, I could see that their faces were blotchy, like the picture up there. And I thought, well, I could see one person having a terrible facial, plastic surgery job that got botched up pretty bad, but two of them, not much chance of that. And I'm thinking that, and I thought, well, gosh, I hope they don't come any closer, but they did. They walked right across the street and down the sidewalk, right outside, stopped right outside of the window where I was sitting. I mean, they're here and I'm here. And they just looked in, and I was kind of scared to look at them, and then I realized they weren't any threat. They just looked kind of freaky. But I looked into their eyes, and it was like a message that they had been worried about me, and I thought, this is really crazy. But they seemed to be telling me that they were there to tell me everything was all right. I had a bad day, but it's all over now. You know, we're here to just make sure you're all right. So then they turned, and they just walked, kind of lockstep, back towards the front of the restaurant. And I thought, oh, thank God they're gone. But they weren't. They walked in the front door, and they sat down at a table where I could see them. I'm sitting here, and they're kind of over there. And I thought, well, surely someone else will see that they don't look right. But nobody seemed to notice. But a waitress came over. She didn't seem perturbed at all. And she brought them each a glass of water. And by then, I'd really had it. And I was just about through. So I thought, I'll just take my bill and get out of here. So I did. Picked it up and walked up to the front to pay, and I had to walk past their table. There really wasn't any other way to get out of there. Either go one way or the other, and I just went straight past. They didn't pay any attention to me as I walked by, and nobody else seemed to notice that there was anything wrong. but they still had the patchy skin on their faces as I walked by.
Now, Helen is a very, very sincere person. But in her very initial conversation with me, she lied to me. She told me, she sucked me in on this by saying, all of this happened in the past, Jean. It's okay. I just want to write out what happened. And right, all of that stuff that we've told you about and much, much more happened in the past. But it didn't stop happening just because we decided to write a book. Very strange things started happening in real time. One such event happened about 3 years ago, and it was Helen's experience. The casino.
Casino event, that's what I call it. It had been a habit of my daughter and me when we both lived in Central California. We were fairly close, 50 miles or so. On either one of our birthdays, we would get together and I would drive up to Tahoe or Reno, usually Tahoe. And we would stop on the way up and have breakfast. And we would gamble for a while, and our $20 or whatever it was that we took, for better or worse. And then we'd come back home, and it was a ritual that we had, and we really had a good time doing that. And so, as Jean said, about 3 or 4 years ago, it was my birthday. And, of course, my daughter wasn't there. She had passed away in 1990. But I still continued the ritual, and up until that time, nothing really unusual had happened. But this particular time, I drove up the road about 25 miles. We have an Indian casino up there. And so I decided we'd just continue the thing. And so I got in the car, went up early, and I gambled a while, and I did quite well, actually, just on the nickel slots. And then I was really hungry because I'd skipped breakfast. I just felt kind of antsy. I just wanted to get out of there that morning, get on the road. So I was the first in line for the luncheon buffet. And there was no one else there. There weren't even many people in the casino. So I walked up to the cashier and I said, I put the money down. And she said, well, will you be paying for the young blonde lady behind you? And I said, well, there's nobody here. It's just me. And she was a Native American woman. She was very dark-skinned. She got quite pale. And she said, oh, I guess I must have made a mistake. And I said, no, it's just me. But I'm laughing inside because I knew that Marissa was there. And she made herself visible to somebody else, just to double prove to me that she really was there. And so I had my lunch, and I was kind of giggling all the time because it was nice. It was a nice feeling to know she come back. And even if only to the cashier to see her. And so then I went on and I gambled and I won a great big jackpot and I had a marvelous day on my birthday celebration.
After years and years of research, we were ready to give up. We couldn't find any written record of Raechel. We could get verbal confirmation of her from various people, but nothing written. We saw this company advertised on the internet that offered a no find, no fee guarantee. So we called them up and gave them Raechel's name. After 3 days, we got a very nasty phone call. It said, we can't find this woman. And we said, well, we've been looking for her for 5 years. We couldn't find her either. And that insulted the man even more. He said, we have databases and sources that you as the public could never find and never have. You misspelled her name or gave us a false name, and hung up. Of course, we didn't have to pay the fee either. But we decided that we had enough evidence. We had built a very compelling case to prove Raechel's existence and what had happened. We decided to write the book. A few days later, this letter that is on the screen showed up in the mail on embossed stationery, stating that this is official verification that Raechel did enroll with River College in spring of 1972. She was granted a leave of absence at that time. I hope this information is sufficient for your needs. We had not told them the time frame, so this verified that this is the same Raechel. Of course, it wasn't sufficient for our needs. If we could find out anything more, we wanted to. And Helen called the college a few days later. The woman that had signed this note did not work in that department anymore. They could not contact her, and we could not contact her. But we had our official proof, written proof, finally, that she had attended college. Now, the story of Raechel's eyes is much, much more complicated than the very brief outline that we have given you today. 35 years ago, in vitro fertilization, cloning, gene splicing, and DNA manipulation were practically unheard of. In fact, all of these things were practically unheard of when Helen first told me her story. But today, they're household words. Secret underground military installations were products of overactive imaginations. But today, you can buy copies and photographs of Area 51 on the internet. When man first stepped on the moon, his ties with earthbound thinking were loosened. Gazing upward, heavenward, the astronaut saw the Earth as she assumed her place in the cosmic family. Humankind's macrocosm suddenly became the universe's microcosm. Helen's story may be the answer to why we don't see a spaceship landing on some world leader's lawn. We have already assumed our place in the cosmos and are standing side by side, looking heavenward together. Raechel was not only Marissa's sister, but she is our sister too. We are them, and they are us. Now, we have allowed some time because we're not too sure what questions you might have, but we would be willing to try to answer anything you have, any question you would like. But if you would please come up to the microphone. Any questions? Okay.
Thanks for your story. It's very interesting. You had mentioned that Raechel was a hybrid, but you didn't say how you knew she was a hybrid. What evidence do you have of that?
Well, I don't have any hard evidence, but I was told that she was a hybrid by the colonel who had adopted her. And he had gotten his information from a scientist from her home planet who was there working at the time Raechel arrived. And that person had figured out the approximate percentage of alien and human. And it was assumed to be between 1/2 and 2/3 alien. But I don't have any hard evidence. Other than that,
Did he mention how the human genotype was taken from the humans? Is it by normal abductions that we know about? Are there voluntary humans that are a part of this project?
We believed that Helen was a part of this. When I said Raechel was Marissa's sister, I wasn't just speaking theoretically or metaphorically. Helen had a series of miscarriages. We go into this in the book, the experiences she had during this time.
and again, it's not concrete evidence, but it's pretty close.
Also, did you have any kind of photographs of her? Do you have any evidence that she existed, physical?
Other than the letter from the college,
No photographs.
we had no photographs. I looked in the college yearbooks for those years. There was nothing.
But we did have the recollections of people that Jean and myself had interviewed, people that I knew at that same time, who were very credible then, and they're extremely credible now, that had known Raechel. So we know that, you know, that's all we do have to go on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the story of the eyes is really intriguing. I would think that anybody who would look in those eyes would be literally staring at her constantly, or to some degree of notice. Wouldn't that have been a startling, constant problem? Anybody with eyes like that we've never seen before.
Well, she always wore the large wraparound sunglasses so that people couldn't get a look at her eyes.
Every time Helen looked into Raechel's eyes, something startling did happen, and that is documented in the book also, the different things that happened.
Thank you so much for sharing all this. It's really very profound, I think. And I do know a woman who did a graduate thesis, a PhD dissertation on alien-human hybrids.
Oh my.
So I'll certainly tell her about this story. And she actually met some that she believed were hybrids and did research on that. But my question is, do you know anything more about the retrievals of the ETs or hybrids that were out in that area that you had referred to, Four Corners or wherever that was?
Not really. The information sort of ended with Raechel being retrieved and the colonel adopting her, and then they went on and moved to a different base when he was transferred, and ended with her going into college and being placed with my daughter. Her age, did you say? They weren't really sure, and she wasn't sure herself, but she placed it at, they placed it at around 13 or 14 at the time, somewhere between 12 and 14 probably, because they had asked her, how old was she? And she said where she came from, which was Zeta Reticuli, they didn't really assign ages as we do. You were just a different stage apparently in growth, and the mental capacity was about the same from the word go.
Do you know anything about what happened to those fetuses?
No.
And they were gone when she disappeared?
I don't know, and I really didn't. I didn't have any way to get back there, and I didn't want to go. Once was enough for that. That was very traumatic.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Very interesting story. Could you do you recall what years she went to this junior college?
It was 1972.
If I named the college, would you have any objections to if I took a guess?
I won't tell you if you're
Okay.
right.
You can ask us
Okay.
later.
Was it in a city with 2 Air Force bases?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your discretion.
Thank you for your courage to stand up and share this. I know it sounds like a fantastical story, and I applaud both of you for your courage. My question is one of paranoia, typical for me, and that is, did Raechel and or her father or anyone else ever ask you not to disclose these things? And my second question, if you can answer that, and if my second question is, do you feel that you've ever been surveyed or followed or contacted by anyone other than Raechel and her adoptive father?
Oh, would you consider an unmarked van with a fictitious license plate with 2 men in unmarked uniforms with sunglasses parked on your front lawn in the morning staring in your kitchen window?
Oh, good, I'm not alone.
Intimidation.
And they looked as if they were probably android. They didn't look exactly human, but they didn't look exactly, they weren't little green men or grays, but I don't think they were entirely human. And yes, I have been surveilled, but I haven't been harmed.
I'm glad for that. Thank you. And were you ever asked by Raechel and or her father to not disclose any of these things, either privately or publicly?
Not by them, but by government. And I'm not afraid to disclose it either. That just made it. And well, actually, Raechel's father did. It was a telepathic exchange of well, not an exchange. It was sort of a download of information from him, and included with that was the admonition to not disclose the information, or things could happen to my children. And I discussed that when we started to write the book. And this came out in the progression because I didn't consciously remember that part of it without being the warning. And through the regression, it did come out. And at that time, I asked my boys how they felt about that. If they didn't want me to go ahead, certainly I could understand if there was a chance of them being harmed. And they both said, "Go for it, Mom." But since then, one has severe psychiatric problems and diabetes, and the other one has hepatitis C that has failed a couple of cures. So I don't know if that was possible to be retaliation or just a natural course of events. You could look at it either way. But they still wanted me to go for it.
When we had this book printed or published, we were hoping that more information will come forth after people began to read it. There are certain names and clues included in this book that people that worked on this project will recognize. And I hope they will come forth. One piece of information that did come forward since this book came out was that a friend of mine was raised in eastern Nevada, south of Ely. And she was quite taken with the book because it was where she was raised. She was talking to her older cousin about the book. And he says, "Four Corners? 4 Corners? Why, nobody's talked about that in years. They took that place off the map years and years ago. But all the old timers know where it is." So he volunteered that he would go camping there when he had time and snoop around to see where this base may be. Now I must hasten to say that Helen was able to describe the entrance and the turnoff on the road very accurately. And we sent a person that was heading down towards Arizona to drive down this road. He not only filmed the entrance that she described and the location she described, but he also filmed 4 other places that matched that description. And he showed her the video, and she was able to pick out the correct turn. But we are hoping for more information. Any other questions? If not, we'll be out in the lobby. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much. You can meet with them out in the main lobby authors table. Ladies and gentlemen, because of the stuff we did during the lunch break, we're running a few minutes behind now. So we're going to keep this break, if we can, to 20 minutes. Okay, this will be a 20-minute break.
Helen. And don't forget, we got to take off our microphones.
Yes, well, mine kind of fell off.
Oh.